The wind howled through the streets of Austin, whipping icy raindrops across Jenny Carter's face. She pulled her coat collar higher, one hand clutching the frayed strap of a canvas tote, the other gripping an umbrella that spun wildly in the gusts. "Why today of all days?" she muttered. Bus number 36 had just turned the corner, leaving her behind in a puddle and a blur of smeared red tail lights. But Jenny didn't flinch. She kept walking deliberate steps forward, her worn-out Converse sneakers squeaking with each press against the flooded sidewalk. Inside her bag was a carefully wrapped gift, a first-generation PS2 controller. Rare, smoky gray edition. She had spent nearly 3 months tracking it down through collector groups, eventually finding one in a tiny store on the outskirts of town. Inside, she had carefully engraved a line that read, "Player 2 forever." Ethan, her husband, used to say that modern controllers like the PS5 had no soul. "They're just tools," he would say. But the PS2, that's childhood. That's when all we had was each other and unstable power at 3 a.m. Today marked their 10th wedding anniversary. And despite the rain lashing her face, her hair tangled in the wind, or the sympathetic glances from passers-by, Jenny knew she had to make it there. Gamehaven Cafe's very first branch, where they used to share a mocha and fight over who got the controller. She smiled softly as the glowing gamepad logo came into view through the curtain of rain. But just as she reached the entrance, she froze. A new sign, new glass doors, and inside, RGB lights flashing like an EDM stage. The bar now had touchscreen menus. A VR room lay toward the back, and clusters of young people in branded hoodies and brightly dyed hair were live streaming beside their lattes. Jenny muttered under her breath, "Doesn't look like the place we used to come to." "But you said they were keeping everything the same." What she didn't know was that right inside among the crowd, the man she was looking for was wearing an apron, scrubbing a grimy game controller. The doors of Gamehaven Cafe chimed softly as they opened. Jenny stepped inside, soaked through her rain-drenched hair, clinging to her face, her muddied Converse squeaking against the floor. She had just stepped inside when a voice called out from behind the bar. "Ma'am, this is the VIP streamer zone. You might be in the wrong place." The speaker was Brandon Ellis, the night manager. Hair gelled into a slick, undercut Bluetooth headset in one ear, a shiny name tag gleaming like the armor of a streamer. Mid-broadcast, Jenny nodded slightly, trying to stay composed. "I'm here to meet my husband, Ethan Carter. We have a reservation at 7. Brandon pulled out an iPad, pretended to scroll, then frowned faintly. "No name in that entry. And, well, we do have a light dress code. Your raincoat is a bit off vibe." Jenny glanced down at her crumpled rain jacket and the canvas backpack with frayed straps. A quiet chuckle rose from a nearby table. Someone was recording. "I just want to find him," she said, her voice softer now. "Sorry," Brandon replied with a polite smile. "If you don't leave, I'll have to call security. There's a more casual spot down the block. Probably more your speed." Jenny froze. Her hand clenched the strap of the tote holding her anniversary gift. She said nothing more. She turned around and walked out, leaving behind curious stares and whispered comments. No one in the cafe knew. At the far end of the kitchen, a man in a controller-cleaning uniform stood, frozen eyes, glassy red, hands gripping a damp towel. That man was Ethan Carter. Ethan Carter stood motionless in the corner of the kitchen, His back pressed against the espresso machine cabinet, still holding a damp cleaning cloth. He stared at the glass door that had just closed behind his wife. She was gone. She had no idea he was there. No idea. He had seen everything. He should have run out, called her name. He should have said, "Stop, she's my wife." But instead, he stayed silent. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan had received an anonymous email. Game Haven. Austin is no longer a place for everyone. Staff, pick and choose, customers. Ordinary people are being turned away at the door. He hadn't believed it. This was their first branch, the place where he and Jenny used to play Crash Bandicoot until midnight laughing when they both missed the same jump and died together in the game. Instead of issuing a warning, Ethan had decided to see for himself. He put away his CEO suit, stored his smartwatch in a drawer. In their place, he put on an old button-up shirt, a scuffed pair of Vans, and adopted a new name, Rick, the controller cleaning staffer, who also wiped down VR headsets. What started as a way to observe the cafe's service culture had now become something else. After what happened that evening, Ethan realized he wasn't just testing his employees, he had been testing himself. He let out a long breath and turned back to the sink. Hot water sprayed out, steaming the air. A PS5 controller slipped from his hands and fell into the wash basin with a splash, just as Ethan whispered, "I stood in the wrong place, in my own cafe." The next morning, Ethan showed up at the shop as usual in the role of Rick the controller cleaning guy, whose buff speed outpaced most load times. But this time, he didn't just watch. He started taking notes. Day 1. After Jenny was turned away. A middle-aged couple walked in, still wearing their work uniforms. Brandon smiled. "Sorry, the VR room is under maintenance." 5 minutes later, a group of college students in full Adidas gear came in. They were escorted straight to the streaming lounge. Day 2. An elderly man asked for a refill of hot tea. He was charged an additional self-service seating fee. At the same time, a well-known YouTuber posted a story. "This cafe is legit chill." His entire bill was waived, plus an invitation to come back and stream again tomorrow. Day 3. Brandon told the front desk staff, "If someone walks in wearing a cheap khaki jacket, just say the tables are down or the Wi-Fi's acting up." Ethan sat in the break room, phone in hand, typing into his notes app. Discriminating against customers based on appearance, prioritizing influencers, ignoring those who actually need safe spaces, turning away guests simply because they don't match the vibe. Leo, the head chef, walked in, threw his gloves down on the counter. "Again," he muttered, "Brandon just made me change a dish for no reason. Said it needed to match the meal's aesthetic for YouTube." Ethan let out a faint laugh. A bitter one. This gaming cafe, it's becoming a stage, he thought. And the audience is being handpicked like a casting call for a TV show. He reopened the same anonymous email from weeks ago. For the first time, he truly understood every word. You built a place where everyone could play. But now it only welcomes those who are allowed to look like they're having fun. And Ethan knew it was time. Someone had been pushed out of this place simply for being too ordinary. Now it was time for him to step out of disguise and step back into who he really was. On the 10th night, Rick was no longer Rick. Ethan Carter, the CEO, stood in the shadows staring at the notes on his phone 38 times. Brandon discriminated against customers. 15 instances of turning away lower-income guests using made-up excuses. And one unforgivable moment, when he kicked Ethan's own wife out of the cafe. During break, Tasha whispered, "Word is, Brandon's got an uncle high up in the company. We're all scared to speak up." Ethan gave a faint, dry laugh. He doesn't have an uncle, but he sure knows how to manufacture fear. That night, Ethan quietly accessed the management system, and there it was, the line that made his heart skip a beat. Jenny Carter, 7:00 p.m., window table, 10th anniversary. It hadn't been cancelled. Brandon had hidden it. The next morning, Ethan didn't show up in an apron. He walked into Game Haven wearing a gray suit, a vintage watch, and a gaze as cold as a factory reset. "Gather the entire staff," he said. "Kitchen crew, too. And call Brandon." No one knew the cafe would open late that day, because today, the owner was about to log back into his account and wipe out every corrupted file. The cafe was silent. Staff stood in a circle around the main floor just behind the RGB-lit bar. Brandon rushed in, blazer, wrinkled tie, crooked. "What's going on? Why is everyone standing around?" Then he saw Ethan, in a suit, standing in the middle of the cafe as if he owned the place. Ethan didn't speak right away. He pulled out a card and placed it on the counter. On the front, Ethan Carter, founder, Game Haven Cafe. On the back, a QR code linking to the company's registration profile. A murmur rippled through the room. A few jaws dropped. Tasha dropped her tray. Brandon froze. "Wait, you're Rick." Ethan gave a slight nod. "Rick is me. I cleaned controllers, wiped tables, and served drinks. And I've heard and seen enough." He turned to face the entire staff. "I built this place so that everyone, and I mean everyone, could find a place in the world of gaming, but someone here turned it into a beta testing room for selective entry." He raised his phone. 38 instances of customer discrimination. 15 times, guests were turned away without cause. And once, "My wife was kicked out of this place." Brandon's face went pale. "I didn't know she was your wife." Ethan clenched his fist, his voice dropping lower. "And that's exactly the problem. So, if you had known, you would have been polite. Are ordinary people not worthy of respect?" The room fell silent. Ethan ended with a firm, decisive voice. "Brandon Ellis, your employment is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Return your badge management credentials and leave the cafe." Brandon stumbled as he removed his name tag, muttering under his breath, "Without me, this place will collapse." Ethan replied calmly, "Then maybe you should go find a place that matches your vibe better." And as the door closed behind Brandon, the cafe held its breath for exactly 3 seconds. Then, a wave of applause erupted, like someone had just hit the reset button on the entire system. The door opened just as Ethan stepped onto the porch. Jenny stood there still in her oversized sweater, hair messily tied up. She looked at him as if she didn't know whether to be angry, sad, or silent. "You're home early, not cleaning controllers anymore." The words were soft, but sharp enough to make Ethan's heart falter. He stepped inside, still holding the gift box, the one Jenny had brought days earlier and left behind on the counter after being turned away. Brandon held on to it. "I got it back." He set the box down, and I fired him. In front of the entire staff, Jenny crossed her arms and leaned against the kitchen counter. "You stood there and watched it all happen to me. You saw them laugh. You saw me humiliated, and you did nothing." Ethan swallowed hard. "I was wrong. I thought if I stepped in too soon it would ruin the investigation. But I forgot. My wife isn't some side character in a plan." Jenny didn't cry, but her eyes said everything. "You always said the cafe was our dream. But that day, it became the place where I got pushed out. By the very dream my husband built." Ethan looked down at his hands that had scrubbed hundreds of controllers, but hadn't reached out when they were most needed to hold his wife's. "If there were a reset button in marriage, I would have hit it already, but there isn't. There's only the choice to relearn how to be with you. Not as a CEO, but as a real partner." Jenny opened the box. The old PS2 controller glowed softly under the kitchen light. Inside, the tiny engraved message read, "Player 2 forever." She let out a faint laugh, her voice low. That line should have been for someone who knew how to press start at the same time. A pause. Ethan extended his hand. "Give me one more round, but this time I won't quit halfway." Jenny looked at him, just a few seconds. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. Not full forgiveness, but a signal that this game wasn't over yet. 6 weeks later. The sky over Austin was clear, the clouds floating like they'd hit pause. A gentle breeze passed over the new sign hanging above the cafe entrance. Player 2, Café, where everyone has a place to play and to belong. Jenny stood beside Ethan, their fingers interlocked. They looked at each other, not like a perfect couple, but like two players who had once lost a match, and were now ready to hit play again. Inside the cafe was a new kind of space. The gaming rigs were still cutting edge, but now there were long wooden tables for friends to play together. A reading corner, a community bulletin board, and a coat rack, offering free outerwear for anyone in need. And most notably, a cozy little section with a sign that read, "Retro Zone," where memories don't judge your outfit. Tasha was now the manager, Leo taught a mini cooking class for neighborhood kids, and Ethan. He still took one controller wiping shift a week, just to keep the dust nostalgia alive, he joked. On opening night, a young girl in a torn hoodie stepped inside, clutching a worn canvas bag. "I don't have much money, just wanted to sit for a bit." Jenny smiled and walked over. "You've come to the right place. Soup's free for first-time guests today. And if you're up for it, we've got some two-player games already running." The girl laughed softly, eyes welling up. From a distance, Ethan watched the moment unfold his hand, brushing the vintage watch on his wrist, the one Jenny had found, and returned to him, this time, without needing a box. At the end of the day, Jenny and Ethan sat once again in the window side booth, the same one where years ago they had shared a cheap mocha and laughed over losing to Mario. "Not quite the anniversary I pictured," Jenny said softly. Ethan raised his cup of hot cocoa to hers and smiled. "But the only one that reminded me why we started." Outside, the LED lights shifted color in a slow, gentle fade. Inside, a soft ding echoed as a new player stepped through the door. Final message. A gaming cafe isn't just for playing. It's to remind us that even if you've lost a few rounds, as long as someone's playing with you, you always have a chance to win again.